It's the 10th of December, 1513. In the countryside surrounding Florence, a man roams the fields. His clothes are modest, humble, but his bearing speaks of authority. He sets his bird-lined traps, argues with woodcutters, gambles with peasants in the tavern. The games often spiral into bitter quarrels, and in these moments he finds an outlet for the anger and frustration he harbors within. Just a few months earlier, he had been tortured by the Florentine Republic and exiled from the city he once served. But now, he returns home. He steps into his study. He sheds the garments of the commoner and dons those of a king or a pope. Then, seated at his desk, he begins to write. He is composing a treatise destined to leave its mark on history, an essential work in the birth of political science and modern thought. Niccolò Machiavelli is writing The Prince. One day, he will return to Florence in an official capacity, but only for a short time. With the expulsion of the Medici in 1527, he will once again be cast out of political life and will die from illness that same year. Yet, Machiavelli remains one of the most enduring symbols of what the Italian Renaissance truly was. His every judgment steeped in the conviction that homo faber fortunae sua, man is the maker of his own fortune, an ideal at the core of a new humanist and Renaissance worldview. The Renaissance was a golden age for all of Italy, marked by a cultural and economic prestige unmatched by any other European nation of the time. And yet, that prestige proved insufficient when the swords came down upon it. Italy's independence and its dreams of unification would vanish for centuries. Di che non voglio vi sbigottiate o diffidiate, perché questa provincia, l'Italia, pare nata per risuscitare le cose morte, come si è visto della poesia, della pittura e della scultura. The Renaissance is undoubtedly a widely recognized cultural movement. Virtually everyone is familiar with the works of at least one of its major artists, like Leonardo or Michelangelo. Most people have heard about the Republic of Venice or the Republic of Florence. It's an historical period with a strong presence in popular imagination, partly due to Enlightenment and later thinkers who defined it as a rebirth of European culture from what they considered the barbarities of the Middle Ages, distancing them from a new era which now, following the discovery of the Americas, was the modern age. In reality, contemporary historians and scholars have significantly revised this perspective thanks to the intellectual reassessment of the Middle Ages happening from the middle of the past century to today. The historical and scholarly community is moving away from the traditional conception of the Middle Ages as a dark age. Indeed, nowadays, the Renaissance is increasingly viewed not as a demarcation signaling the start of a new era and of a new way of thinking for humanity radically different from before, but rather as a continuation of the late Middle Ages and what its natural tendencies were. It's also true that in historical studies, the usage of clear-cut dates to distinctly separate different eras is indeed useful, but often misleading. A world on the eve of the fall of the Western Roman Empire and a century afterwards was less different than one can imagine, just as the world of the 1300s was not dramatically different from that of the 1500s. History is a continuous flux, and a division in clear and well-demarcated historical eras is a useful method of study, not an accurate representation of reality. With these premises behind us, we can now delve deeper into our exploration of the Italian Renaissance. The historical reasons behind its developments are manifold and are all interconnected to each other. We will try, in this discussion, to analyze each of them. But before delving into matters of culture or economy, we must first consider the motivation of a more political and historical nature. We need to journey back in time, return to the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and examine the conditions that brought to the very first reason behind the Italian Renaissance, the geopolitical fragmentation of Italy. 476 AD, outskirts of Ravenna. From the horizon, the sound of marching grows louder, iron against earth, drumbeat of the inevitable. Odoacer, the formidable leader of the barbarian Foederati, is about to enter the ancient capital with calm determination. He does not come to negotiate, he comes to end an age. Within the imperial palace, the last emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, a boy too young to understand the weight of his crown, is quietly deposed. No grand speeches, no final stands, just a quiet collapse of an entire world. But Odoacer does not claim the throne for himself, nor for any other. Instead, he sends the imperial regalia eastward across the sea to Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, an act speaking louder than conquest. The West no longer needs an emperor. Zeno grants Odoacer the title of patrician. Better to have friends than enemies, he might have fought. But it is only a formality. In truth, Odoacer rules Italy as his own. The Roman Empire in the West is no more. What had stood for 1,000 years is now only silence. Julius Nepos will continue to claim the imperial title for another 4 years, but he will never govern any land beyond the province of Dalmatia. The reasons behind the fall of the empire are numerous and lie beyond the scope of this video, but it is important for now to acknowledge that one of the main factors was the almost complete mercenary barbarization of the Roman army. Barbarians that considered themselves first members of their peoples and tribes, and only after, and often not at all, Romans. For centuries, no Italian warrior class emerged. With the rule of Odoacer first, later with the Gothic Kingdom of Italy under Theodoric, a militarily active class of Italian citizens capable of rebelling against foreign rule and of reclaiming control of a Roman state entity never formed. Indeed, during the reign of Theodoric, for example, while Italians were admitted and sometimes favored in civilian life, they were banned from military service. In 1553, the Eastern Emperor Justinian reconquers Italy in the Gothic Wars, a conflict that has, however, the consequence of devastating the peninsula, destroying its urban centers and reducing dramatically its population, struck simultaneously by war, plague and famine. Population that was already in decline for quite some time, victim to innumerable sackings and conflicts in the past centuries. The city of Rome, which under Augustus enjoyed a population of around 1 million, found itself having, at the beginning of the century, a population of about 100,000, and by the end of the wars, of about 30,000. To nullify any possibilities of a quick recovery for Italy was a Lombard invasion in 1568, which caused additional devastation and pillaging. An interesting note is it that during this very conquest that rose the first nucleus of the city of Venice. Though already inhabited by the 5th century, the area grew significantly due to the influx of people trying to evade Lombard brutalities, seeking refuge in the marshy lands of the lagoon. The Lombard conquest was not total. It divided Italy in two, one side controlled by the Lombards and the other by the Eastern Empire. It has been now 2 centuries after the fall of the empire, and Italy is already deeply divided. The barbarian groups that had settled Italy until this point never succeeded in fully replacing the local population, which, despite its considerable decline, remained extremely numerous. The fusion of peoples that allowed the French to identify with the Franks or the Spaniards with the Visigoths simply never occurred in Italy, at least not within a comparable time frame or manner. This was largely due to the disproportionately small size of the ruling elite, and more crucially, its explicit reluctance to intermingle with the native population, thus delaying integration. For instance, under Theodoric and later under Alboin, king of the Lombards, along with its dukes, Germanic individuals accused of crimes were judged according to their own laws, while Italians were subjected to Roman law. It is true, however, that over time the Lombards gradually began assimilating with Italians, but crucially it was the Lombards who adopted Roman culture, customs and language, and not the other way around. These dynamics had the consequence of not establishing in this era the premises for the creation of a proto-nation based on ethnic identification that we see in the rest of Europe at this time. The division of Italy into two distinct geopolitical entities, moreover, already clearly begins fostering a conflictual climate among the local population, exacerbated by the repeated raids conducted by each dominion against the other. Once again, in 774, Italy's administrative structures were being dismantled. In the 8th century, the king of the Lombards, Desiderius, came really close to the total expulsion of imperial authority from Italy, with the Lombards nearing the capture of Rome, which had thus far remained under nominal Eastern dominion. Fearing the loss of independence for the Diocese of Rome, the then Pope Adrian I requested assistance from Charlemagne, king of the Franks, securing independence for the papal territories in exchange for the crown of Italy. Charlemagne thus descends into Italy, defeats Desiderius, usurps his crown, and is famously crowned Emperor of the Romans on Christmas Day 800 AD, renewing an imperial authority that had been considered vacant but not extinguished, granting him de jure governance over all of Western Christendom. This act also serves the papacy as an implicit annulment of the sovereignty that the Eastern emperors still claimed over the Western territories of the empire. The new emperor will retain many aspects of the previous Lombard governmental structures in Italy, even retaining most of the Lombard dukes, perpetuating thus a system of government which by itself granted large autonomy of action to the formers, which, with the implosion of the Carolingian kingdom and the subsequent fragmentation of the Kingdom of Italy, will continue ruling the respective duchies. Meanwhile, the island of Sicily will experience a brief period of Arab domination following the Aghlabid conquest at the expense of the Eastern Empire. Throughout this numerous shift in governance, we need to consider, however, another important factor, by itself relevant alongside historical events for the advent of Italian fragmentation. The local administrative structures of the Roman Empire have never, in the course of these centuries, completely disappeared. In the majority of post-Roman cities, we can find these structures, oftentimes in the form of a council that could trace its origins to the senatorial, local governance systems of a republican and imperial age, usually led at this time by the local bishop. While elsewhere in Europe, these forms of self-government were co-opted by the monarchical authorities, replacing bishops with representatives of the monarch itself, appointed or elected. In Italy, this never occurred, nor a unified government was ever sufficiently strong to seize control of these local governing structures, incorporating them in a broader, national macrostructure. With the rise of the Carolingian kingdoms of Italy and the Roman Empire of the Franks, it was precisely these structures, giving autonomy to the Italian cities, that gave legitimacy to the imperial title north of the Alps, a dynamic that will become especially prominent during the Holy Roman Empire and the Ottonian dynasty. Precisely when the Germanics will acquire the political authority of imperial continuity, they will be compelled to give increasingly extensive concessions to the already highly autonomous Italian cities, eventually maintaining only nominal governance when these cities will gain the ability to defend their autonomy with their weapons. With Otto's descent into Italy and the deposition of King Berengar II, the Holy Roman Empire officially begins, though the first official mention of a Sacrum Romanum Imperium will only appear in 1157. This dominion will materialize itself via explicit concession of the papacy, which from now on will claim the exclusive right to crown the emperor, effectively removing any legal room for a king to independently proclaim imperium over Italy. While all of this is happening, in the south we see yet another change in government, with the Norman conquest of southern Italy, culminating in 1130 with the unification under the Kingdom of Sicily. As mentioned previously, with the Ottonian dynasty, Italian cities experience a further significant growth in their autonomous power. The method of governance of Otto I is of administrating through the local bishops, who elsewhere in Europe acted as counterweights to noble aristocracy, but who in Italy were already, de facto, the strongest political entity, strength that thus could only grow further. This system depended fundamentally on the emperor's ability to select and control bishops, and exactly this system in the future will give rise to the investiture controversy, an ideological conflict precisely concerning the right to appoint bishops, which will split Italy itself into two factions, the Guelphs, pro-Roman Curia, and the Ghibellines, pro-Empire. With the end of the Ottonian dynasty and the rise of Conrad II, known as the Salian, in 1027, we see Italy experience widespread revolt by vassal and vassaux, who sought to emancipate themselves from the empire. Conrad attempts to restore imperial order and authority in Italy through multiple expeditions, but is forced into significant compromises, further empowering the local nobility. At this time, the distinctly urban legacy inherited from the empire was still strong. The Italian peninsula had always maintained a much higher urban density compared to every other European nation of the time, fostering the development of an artisan and merchant class that was simply not possible elsewhere. The convergence between the influence of this new class with the power and wealth of the numerous noble families present in each city has expressed itself, combined with Lombard and local traditions and the imminent crisis of the feudal system, into the formation of loosely democratic forms of government, where power was shared relatively equally among several prominent families, laying the foundations for what would soon become the municipal republics of the 11th century. During the reign of Henry IV, the investiture controversy officially begins, and it is in this context that the greatest imperial effort to reclaim control over Italy is undertook by Frederick Barbarossa. The Italian nobility, significantly different from their Germanic counterparts and much less involved in the administration of the empire, poorly tolerates foreign rule and its feudal structure, which is not able to serve the growing urban interests of the northern Italian cities that are now experiencing a strong economic growth. In the meantime, the city of Milano is adopting an increasingly expansionistic attitude, leading several comuni to explicitly request Barbarossa's military intervention. The emperor descends into Italy multiple times, but the cities, particularly Milan, continue to rebel against imperial domination. These cities eventually form the Lombard League and manage to decisively defeat Barbarossa at the Battle of Legnano in 1176, forcing the empire to grant even greater autonomy to the Italian city-states. The absence of a strong imperial power allows the communal entities to grow even further, yet in these centuries they are unable to develop a sufficient hegemonical force capable of achieving unification into geopolitical entities of a larger size, capable themselves of attempting a territorial expansion across the entire Italian peninsula. Several other factors also compound this fragmentation: the absence of an Eastern imperial force free from other conflicts capable of exerting pressure onto Italy, foreign domination of the kingdoms of Naples and Sicily, initially under the Hohenstaufen dynasty, rulers of the Holy Roman Empire, and later under the Angevin dynasty, closely related to the French monarchy, dynasties generally uninterested in Italian unification, who presided over deeply feudal agrarian societies with influential barons capable of obstructing royal ambitions, and the absence in these societies of an economic growth capable of supporting conquest of a more developed central and northern Italian states. Compounded also by persistent papal interference in temporal affairs, both in Italy and throughout Europe, with a state too strong to be conquered by its rival powers, but too weak to conquer them itself, and Italy's very geography divided in two by a mountain range, hindering the construction of unificatory geopolitical entities. In vain, Italian writers and thinkers such as Dante and Petrarca would appeal for a reversal of Italy's fortunes. Vain were their reivindications of imperial legacy, vain were their desires for unification and reacquisition of power. The centuries have passed, and by the dawn of the historical period of our interest, the early stages of the Renaissance in the 14th century, we find an Italy still divided, yet economically flourishing. While continental Europe is fully embroiled in the crisis of the late Middle Ages, plagued by conflicts, famine, and popular revolts, the Italian comuni are capable of recovering their strength before their continental counterparts and of propelling themselves towards the modern era. Italy's division into comuni, coupled with their exponential economic growth, has brought about an exceptionally wealthy political class that, however, lacks the sufficient military strength to decisively overpower their neighbors, themselves equally prosperous. This condition brings nobles and merchants to invest their fortunes in a different way. Instead of exhausting communal wealth in large-scale conflicts, though smaller, frequent conflicts persisted, they are more inclined to bring the interregional conflict to the cultural battlefield of prestige, one of constant competition between the states in the construction of grander palaces, more magnificent artworks, finer literature, and more revolutionary devices. Unlike elsewhere in Europe, Italy's wealth is not in the hands of a purely military aristocracy, but rather in the hands of an educated bourgeoisie and noble class who cultivate a greater interest in culture and knowledge. Funds are allocated to artists and thinkers, allowing them to reach unprecedented innovation and development in their respective fields. The absence of a centralized repressive authority, furthermore, permits greater intellectual experimentation and the circulation of more radical ideas. The workshop of the Renaissance is now fully operational. 29th of May, 1453. Thundering explosions around the city. The sun must have sounded like the trumpets of Judgment Day. The citizens are ready to defend their home, the death. The last stronghold of Rome is about to fall. For 1,000 years, no siege has breached the walls of Constantinople. But this one will. Even soldiers from Italy have come to aid the city, and Giovanni Giustiniani Longo will hold an heroic defense for 55 days, but it will be in vain. Mehmed II stands at the gates of his massive bombards. The Venetians are late, and the number of defenders is desperately small. Then, breach! The walls have finally been pierced. A last desperate charge crashes against the Ottoman ranks. Leading it is the last emperor himself, Constantine XI Palaiologos, who will perish during the fighting. After more than 2 millennia, Roman civilization has definitively fallen, though only after countless transformations. Yet, the fall of the Eastern Empire will give rise to a new beginning. Hidden within the boats of Constantinople's refugees is the precious legacy of Byzantine knowledge, and the rekindling of a flame of Roman culture in Europe is now closer than ever. Already by 1204, with the sack of Constantinople at the height of the Fourth Crusade, many Greek thinkers had looked to Italy as a potential refuge from the now waning empire. During the empire's final decline, and especially after its fall, numerous additional scholars came to Italy, bringing with them their knowledge of classical Greek and Roman texts, and oftentimes the texts themselves. Some lost to the West for more than 1,000 years, others filtered to us through Arabic translations, and others still through medieval scholastic interpretations. These men, upon their arrival, considerably influenced the thought of that now emerging revolutionary movement known as Humanism. George Amistos Plethon, George of Trebizond, Theodor Gaza, John Argyropoulos, and many others were extremely relevant in shaping humanism and its practical manifestation, the Renaissance itself. It has become crucial for us to arrive at a proper understanding of humanism in order to fully comprehend the Renaissance itself. The rise of humanism allowed the West to shed the uncertainties and restriction inherited from a civilization long in decline. This was made possible by the collapse of the value systems that had bound society to medieval Christian norms, opening the way for a newer, freer, more nonconformist and creative intellectual climate. This turning point could occur only within the specific context of 15th and 16th century Italy, which offered certain key preconditions. Besides the numerous and notable university centers, above all else stood the Roman legacy, the ideological foundation of everything humanism and the Studio Humanitatis was. Nowhere else was this Roman legacy more visible and clear to the eyes of any observer. Italy was, and still is, an enormous spark of memories, an immense repository for traces of Roman greatness. It was especially in Italy that the familiarity with imperial ruins fostered among its inhabitants a sentiment of direct lineage connecting their contemporary civilization to the womb of ancient Rome, and it was this very sentiment that brought Italians to develop their profound love for antiquity, love that was necessary for the translation, re-elaboration of the ancient texts now condemned to us, happening in the extended Renaissance period. Among humanism's early forerunners were Brunetto Latini and Dante Alighieri. The first, Chancellor of Florence, encouraged his fellow citizens to transcend the boundaries set by feudal and ecclesiastical authorities, and it is with him that we first encounter some of the various attitudes that will give humanism its character: the use of rhetoric in the service of civil society, personal activism, social realism in the spirit of Cicero, appreciation of individual genius, and an emphasis on education. The second, eternally famous and a student of Latini, aside from the admirable work of the Divine Comedy and of the De Vulgari Eloquentia, which established Florentine vernacular as a noble language, suitable even for the finest literary endeavors, he also wrote the De Monarchia, one of the most significant treatises of medieval philosophy, and the first great step towards what would become the doctrine of separation between church and state. But the figure now acknowledged as central in these developments was Francesco Petrarca. Father of humanism, for him, the return to Latin classics was not merely a philological exercise, but a project of national moral rebirth. Petrarca, of a restless spirit, saw himself as part of an Italy fallen, but not yet dead. He deeply admired ancient Rome and maintained that Italy had to reclaim its role as leader of the world, having been usurped by the French and German civilizations. He was also deeply influenced by the events contemporary to him, such as the issue of the Avignon papacy, which tried to remove even the center of the Ecclesia from Rome to France. Petrarca's influence was profound and multifaceted. He promoted the rediscovery and translation of classical texts, providing impetus for the research of Boccaccio and Salutati. He threw himself into the controversies thanks to which he defined humanism in contradiction to what he defined as the barbaric influences of the medieval tradition, with a particular resentment towards the Goths and Lombards we saw earlier. He became the point of reference for all Italian culture, had the honor of becoming the second poet laureate since antiquity, and during the 20s and 30s of the 14th century laid down the foundations of a modern philological method, reconstructing, for example, the Aburbe Condita of Livy. His Canzoniere served as a model for all Renaissance literary works that followed. However, it was as a philosopher that Petrarca left his most enduring influence on humanism, establishing positions that would become central to the anthropocentric cultural movement, such as the idea of a poet as a philosopher, educator, and champion of culture, rhetoric as a founding pillar of the individual and society, the emphasis on human virtue as capable of conquering fate, and the vision of classical Roman culture not as a relic of an ancient past, but as a real alternative to the medieval society in which he lived, poorly tolerated by the man. From here, alongside posterior thinkers such as Leonardo Bruni and Lorenzo Valla, he contributed to dismantling the medieval notion of the division of human history into two eras, that sine gratia, preceding Christ, therefore unredeemed, and that sub gratia, blessed by the possibility of salvation. The collapse of this model, linked to the claim of superiority of the Christian world towards anything that was other, allowed for the first time in the Christian West secular culture to gain intellectual legitimacy within the public sphere. It is impossible for us, furthermore, not to discuss Giovanni Boccaccio, friend of Petrarca and author of the celebrated Decameron, a work which is opened by the phrase "umana cosa è," a humane thing it is, clearly signaling the theme of the 100 stories that follow. The work, through moral fables and direct appeals to the reader, reinterprets human experience not as being based on received doctrines, but on perceived realities. A fundamental theme of humanism. It furthermore declares war on the tyrannies of church and state, advocating for a moral order constructed upon the potentialities inherent in human nature. Additionally, Boccaccio is the author of the De Genealogia Deorum Gentilium, an interpretative compendium of classical myths, the first in a long series of mythographies published during the Renaissance. Heirs to Petrarca and Boccaccio will be, among others, Salutati, Chancellor of the Florentine Republic, who will attempt to legitimize Florence as the moral and republican heir of Rome; Leonardo Bruni, author of the first modern historiographical work, his Historiae Florentini Populi, likewise attempting to establish a Roman inheritance for the Florentine Republic, and the idea that republican liberty is an Italian tradition; Lorenzo Valla, master of a newly born science of philology, who famously will be able to demonstrate that the donation of Constantine, the document on which the Church bases its temporal authority, is a forgery. He will also endeavor to reconcile Epicurean thought with Christianity; and Marsilio Ficino, the first translator of Plato's complete works into Latin and founder of the Neoplatonic Academy of Florence. Through humanism, man is conceived as having an endless capacity to surpass what has already been achieved. Man is made in God's image, also in his capacity to create and achieve the new and the beautiful. This thesis, largely derived from Giannozzo Manetti, reaches the conclusion that human creations are as admirable as those of God. Manetti, alongside references to the great monuments of antiquity, also praises the accomplishments of man contemporary to him, such as Brunelleschi's dome, Giotto's painting, and Ghiberti's sculpture, with an appreciation towards works that effectively were a re-elaboration of what was now considered another golden age of humanity, pre-Christian Rome. And exactly when man became object of wonder to himself, creativity began reflecting upon itself. Countercultural thoughts, such as those briefly examined by us here, explicitly challenge the educational apparatus of medieval Europe, and indeed, an essential component of humanist thought is the critique to what were the educational models of the period and their purposes. With the introduction of what were the Studia Humanitatis, a study of classical literature, of history, dialectics, rhetoric, arithmetic, Greek and Latin, where the concept of humanitas, from which the movement derived its name, originated from Cicero's understanding of it. The humanitas is human virtue in all its forms: benevolence, compassion, fortitude, generosity, honor, eloquence. The individual possessing humanitas could not merely be a sedentary philosopher, but an active participator in life. Just as action without knowledge is aimless and barbaric, knowledge without action is sterile and pointless. The purpose of the Studia Humanitatis is not only the education of the young, but also the guiding of the adult. It included not only realist social criticism, but also the formulation of utopian hypotheses, not merely an academic recollection of history, but also the construction of a bold future. Humanism aspired to a comprehensive reform of culture, the total transformation of the society Petrarca himself declared as living in a dark age. The movement's influence was so extensive that it rapidly expanded across all of Europe, and with it came also its educational system. Future generations would be raised within a humanist educational system, giving rise to all the great men we shall encounter in the course of our discussion. It is in this context that all the great intellectuals of the Renaissance took shape, including Machiavelli, who introduced us into a journey. All begin with a meticulous study and interpretation of classical texts to reformulate the fundamental concepts of man, power, and art. Humanism manifests itself in the Renaissance in full force, shifting from ink on parchment to action, and will lead to the innovations in every field of human intellect, which will ultimately lead Italy to become the economic and cultural vanguard of the entire world. To fully understand the conditions that enabled the development of the Renaissance, we must not only direct our attention to the political and cultural conditions in the peninsula, but also to its physical and material body, to its land, its seas, its inhabitants, and their economic activities. Without the extraordinarily favorable economic preconditions that developed in Italy between the 14th and 15th century, without an adequate productive and logistical structure, without accumulated and circulating wealth, the Italians would have lacked a fundamental basis to bring about a cultural revolution. Culture, no matter how noble or immaterial, needs support. Support which comes in the forms of availability of resources, the capacity for its fruition, and investment capacity. By its geographical nature, Italy is by itself a perfect bridge for Mediterranean trade. It is a narrow, long and mountainous peninsula, bordered on three sides by seas linking it to the African and Asian continent. It is joined to the European continent to the north and is protected by its ambitions, by the Alps. It enjoyed a series of logistical advantages that no other territory possessed to the same extent. The perfectly central position in the Mediterranean provided equidistance from both the Byzantine and Islamic worlds of the east and to the Latin west. Its rugged coastlines, rich in natural harbours, facilitated the development of port cities, which during the Middle Ages became driving centres of maritime trade. This was notably true of the maritime republics, which there were many, but are traditionally shortened to Venice, Genoa, Pisa, and Amalfi. These cities, benefiting from their position and their seafaring traditions, specialized in shipbuilding, logistics, and in managing long-distance commerce, emerging as crucial trading hubs for the European world. They were also able to capitalize on the Crusader conquests in the Levant, expanding their commerce and establishing warehouses and settlements in the east. Amalfi, for example, held fondaci as far as India in the 11th century. These were building complexes where merchants could house their goods, carry out their trades, and often even reside, something in between a colony and a warehouse. In the meantime, inland cities, less directly connected to the sea but were linked to ports via river routes and ancient roads inherited from the empire, specialized in the transformation of raw materials into high-value goods. Firenze, Florence, exemplifies this phenomenon, importing raw wool from the British Isles and processing it through a highly specialized and complex production chain into valuable fabrics destined for export. The Tuscan city not only stood at the center of Europe's wool industry, but was also one of the continent's most advanced financial hub, expert in the now emerging science of modern finance. The major Florentine banking families, such as De Medici, Bardi, and Peruzzi, managed extensive credit networks reaching all major European cities. Even far from the boot, Italian migrants handled in large part the finance of the major European banking centers. To these existing structural factors were added the consequences of an apparently catastrophic event, which, however, yielded even more favorable conditions in the medium and long term. Between 1346 and 1352, the Black Death ravaged Europe, reducing its population by a third, and in some areas even by half. All major cities suffered greatly, but as is often the case in moments of profound disruption, what followed was a widespread reorganization of economic life. The resulting scarcity of labor increased the value of work, giving workers greater bargaining power. Subsequently, wages rose exponentially, and many previously uncultivated lands were converted to more profitable crops or to pastureland and wool production. Concurrently, the decline in population led to a general redistribution and concentration of wealth. The surviving urban population inherited properties, houses, and businesses, enabling them to pursue even more profitable or intellectual activities, allowing the growth of the patronage of artists that characterizes Renaissance cultural production. Florence, for example, saw its economy recover and expand in the second half of the 1300s, investing in the construction of public works, in the patronage of artists, and in the promotion of liberal arts. Wool, silk, leather, paper and glass were pillars of Florentine economy, their value multiplied by artisanal refinement and the expertise of its craftsmen. Yet what truly transformed Florentine and Italian economy, and eventually that of Europe and of the entire world, was the emergence of an unprecedented banking system, backbone of the modern age. The great Florentine banking families developed an extraordinarily modern financial system based on technical innovations that enable credit management on an international scale. The widespread diffusion of the lettera di cambio, bill of exchange, an embryonic form of the modern promissory note, became fundamental to the expansion of international trade. Thanks to it, for the first time, it became possible to transfer funds without physically moving money from one location to another. A merchant could deposit money at a bank in one city and receive a bill of exchange authorizing a clerk at a branch of the same bank in another city to pay the designated amount to a specified beneficiary. Florentine banks established branches in nearly all the major commercial centers of Europe, from Bruges to London, Barcelona to Paris, and from Naples to Constantinople. The Peruzzi family, for example, managed one of the largest banks in Europe, with 15 branches stretching from the Middle East to London. The Medici Bank, in particular, would become, at the height of the Renaissance, a financial empire without precedents. Organized in semi-autonomous branches, it employed the double-entry bookkeeping system, developed in Italy during this period, and maintained strict control over debts and credits. Through their banking empire, the Medici will become the wealthiest family in Europe, likely the world. Managing the majority of global financial transactions, the Florentine florin will become the preferred currency for international trade, and their wealth will serve as one of the most vital lifelines for Renaissance art. In this sense, Florence was not merely a center of manufacturing or art. Its prosperity was not limited to what it produced, but extended to the way it could mobilize, multiply, and distribute its wealth. It was precisely this mechanism of capital accumulation and circulation that made the very existence of the Renaissance possible. Without banks, without credit, without European financial networks, none of the great works of art, architectural feats, or political treatises would have ever come to see the light of day. And even though in the latter half of the 14th century due to the Black Death, constant wars, and the insolvency of monarchs. The general economy contracted and many banking families collapsed. By the start of the 15th century, economic life had fully recovered. In Venice, the situation was not so different, though shaped by a strong maritime and commercial vocation. The lagoon city, favored by one of the most stable political systems among the Italian republics, dominated the Adriatic and had built a vast trade network stretching from the coasts of Syria and Egypt to Flanders and the English Channel. Its galleys regularly sailed the Mediterranean, protected by a standing military fleet, while its merchants established fondaggi and trading stations throughout the east. Thanks to the privileged relations acquired first with the Byzantine Empire, later with the Mamluks of Egypt, Venice managed to secure an almost total monopoly over the spice trade, which flowed into its port from Alexandria or Tyre, to be then resold across Europe with extraordinarily high profit margins. Mention must also be made of Venetian productive capabilities, most notably its renowned glass industry. Centered on the island of Murano, the quality of this glass was so high to dominate the European market to such an extent to become safeguarded by state secret. Venetian glassmakers held special status and were forbidden from immigrating, preventing the spread of their technical knowledge. Another example was the Arsenale. The Venetians were capable of producing one ship every day using an assembly line ante litteram. The Serenissima possessed an extraordinarily advanced bureaucratic, fiscal, and logistical apparatus for its time. It managed fondaggi in the east, warehouses in Rialto, and state galleys for official routes. The city managed to control trade via tariffs and monopolies, profiting even from goods merely passing through its storehouses. Luxury goods were taxed multiple times before reaching the northern European fairs, making Venice's role as a compulsory hub extremely lucrative. Venice was not merely a trading city, it was a merchant republic, a state organism whose purpose was the management of trade, the protection of shipping routes, and the systematical extraction of profit from international commerce. And it would precisely be Venetian dominance of trade, along other factors, to drive European nations in search of new trade routes and to eventually lead to the discovery of the Americas, an endeavor that will, however, be largely carried out by Italian navigators. On the opposite coast of the peninsula stood the Republic of Genova, La Superba, as Petrarca called it, in perpetual rivalry with Venice due to their shared mercantile ambitions. Following the reconstruction of the Eastern Empire after its partition during the Fourth Crusade, it was the Genoese who reaped the greatest gains, establishing numerous ports and transit stations across the Aegean, as well as various settlements in Crimea. Over time, Genoa specialized itself in maritime finance, inventing contracts and legal frameworks that anticipated modern commercial law. In time, the Ligurian city would play a central role in managing the public debt of the Spanish monarchy, financing many of the enterprises of Charles V and Philip II. In Lombardy, Milano specialized itself in the production of weapons, armors, and metal tools. Lombard metallurgy, protected by the Visconti, later di Sforza, developed a highly refined technical tradition which translated into a thriving and high-quality industry. It became customary, for instance, for the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire to wear Milanese armor. These metallurgical skills will later, in the Renaissance, form the foundation upon which Italy's nascent firearm production will develop, exemplified by the Fabbrica d'Armi Pietro Beretta, which has operated continuously from 1526 to today. These were only a few examples that the Renaissance was not only Florentine, Venetian, Genoese or Milanese, it was a polycentric phenomenon nourished by a network of cities and regions sustained by a strong economic vitality. Italy as a whole during the Renaissance was the wealthiest and most urbanized region of Europe. In this context, the peninsula became not only an economic power, but also a cultural one, because the accumulation of capital, the availability of skilled labor, and the existence of a stable exchange network enabled the birth of a market of ideas. The artisan, the merchant, the banker could invest in books, artists, schools and academies, wealthy families aspire to gain not only economic power, but also to gain one of symbolism, to be remembered, to link their names to a work of art, a church, a palace. And it was exactly this desire for immortality, sustained by an enviable economic structure, that made possible the flourishing of the Renaissance we know best, the Renaissance of art. It is a spring evening of the year 1490. In the dining room of the Medici Palace, the family has gathered for dinner alongside several guests, family friends, beneficiaries of the patronage of the host, and tutors of the young children present at the table. Seated here tonight are three of the most important thinkers of the Renaissance: the current Lord of Florence, three of his successors, the future Pope, and one of the future greatest artists in human history. The previous year, Lorenzo had observed the young Michelangelo sculpting in the garden of San Marco, and had decided to welcome him into his own like an adopted son. One of the guests at this table would later die of poisoning during the French occupation of Florence at the outset of the Italian Wars, most likely poisoned by Piero, his pupil and Lorenzo's heir. Certainly, the conversations at these dinners must have been fascinating, but unfortunately, the limits of our knowledge prevent us from knowing exactly what this particular group of people might have discussed. Yet it is clear that on an evening like this, gathered around this table, some of the most influential architects of the early modern age. Now that we have formed a clearer understanding of the leading factors behind the birth of the Italian Renaissance, we can better grasp what the Renaissance truly was, for after all, everything is the sum of its constituent parts. It is now time for us to fully enter the Renaissance period, to retrace its major events and arrive at the dawn of the Italian Wars, which will bring this brief yet endlessly fascinating era to an end. Our journey resumes in the second half of the 14th century. Europe is still reeling from the devastating impact of the Black Death, yet from the shadow of this tragedy emerge Petrarca and Boccaccio, whose revolutionary humanist works herald a new intellectual dawn. In the eventful year of 1347, Rome witnesses the rise of a remarkable figure, Cola di Rienzo. Inspired by the grandeur of ancient Rome, Cola dreams of restoring the Republic, a people's government founded on justice and equality. For a brief, luminous moment, Rome experiences a revival under the guidance of this charismatic leader known as the last of the tribunes of the people. His impartial justice wins respect from citizens and nobles alike, yet his brilliance proves self-destructive. Cola's growing tyranny and arrogance alienate his supporters, first the baronage, then the common people, ultimately leading to his downfall and the collapse of his republican experiment. In 1343, Papal Legate Egidio Albornoz marches into central Italy, reclaiming territories that had slipped from the Avignon papacy's grasp. His conquest culminates in 1357 with the Constituzione Segidiane, a set of laws so enduring that they will remain in effect for nearly 500 years. In 1356, at the Battle of Poitiers, the English decisively defeat the French, capturing King John II and temporarily halting the grueling 100 Years' War. Shortly thereafter, France is shaken by the Jacquerie, a violent peasant revolt, while in the north, the Hanseatic League is established, echoing Italy's maritime dominance but within the Baltic Sea. By 1361, the Ottoman Turks have captured Adrianople, designating it as their new capital, signaling the beginning of their relentless conquest of the Balkans and the slow, inexorable strangling of Constantinople. The protracted struggle for control of Sicily ends in 1372, forcing young Queen Giovanna I of Anjou to accept its loss to the Aragonese. On January 17, 1377, Pope Gregory XI makes his momentous return to Rome, ending decades of Avignonese exile. Yet, his death the following year plunges the church into the Western Schism, a devastating division lasting over 40 years, which by 1410 sees Christendom fractured into three rival papacies, those of Pisa, Avignon, and Roma. Florence erupts in 1378 with the Ciompi revolt, a short-lived uprising led by wool guild workers who briefly form a popular government. Though swiftly suppressed, it prefigures by centuries the conflicts between capital and labour. England too faces upheaval in 1381 with its own peasant rebellion, sparked by crippling taxation amid ongoing warfare with France. Though crushed, this event marks the beginning of the gradual decline of the institution of serfdom in the kingdom. In Eastern Europe, the Union of Crevon in 1385 binds Poland and Lithuania under a single dynasty, creating a formidable power destined to dominate the region for centuries. That same pivotal year, Gian Galeazzo Visconti is proclaimed Duke of Milan. Under his ambitious leadership, the duchy significantly expands its influence, forming a confederacy stretching from Lombardy into parts of Tuscany and Umbria. This sparks decades of fierce war among the Italian states, engulfing the first half of the 15th century. Gian Galeazzo undertakes the most vigorous attempt at northern Italian unification since the fall of Rome. However, his grand ambitions are abruptly halted in 1402, at the turn of the century, by his untimely death from the plague, leaving his duchy fragmented and vulnerable to rival powers. One detail of great importance for our narrative is the dowry granted upon the Duke's death to his only child who survived to adulthood. Valentino Visconti marries Louis of Valois, Duke of Orléans, a younger brother to King Charles of France. He receives as part of the dowry the County of Asti, and in the event of the extinction of a legitimate male line, the right of succession of the Duchy of Milan for Valentina and their descendants. That is precisely what will happen. 90 years later, Louis XII of Valois, grandson of Valentina, will become King of France, and with the illegitimate Sforza dynasty ruling Milan, Louis will possess the right to descend into Italy to reclaim his duchy, initiating the second act of the bloody Italian wars. But that moment still lies ahead. For now, the time is not yet ripe, and Italy does not yet know what is to come. At this moment, Italy, and indeed all of Europe, is preoccupied with the Ottoman expansion in the Balkans. In 1394, Pope Boniface IX proclaims a new crusade against the Turks, aiming to halt their advance. Among the participants, in addition to others, are the Kingdom of France and the Kingdom of England, who agree to a temporary truce in the 100 Years' War, as well as the Kingdom of Hungary and the republics of Venice and Genoa. This alliance, however, proves insufficient and results in the massacre at Nicopolis. Nearly the entire crusading army is either killed or captured, and after this defeat, Western Europe will no longer attempt to halt the Ottoman advance, at least not until it will be too late and the Eastern Empire will be fully destroyed. Fortunately, in 1402, at the dawn of a new century, the Ottoman Turks are defeated by Timur, last of the great Mongol conquerors from the steppes. His victory holds the Turkish advance for nearly 50 years, providing Constantinople a providential reprieve. In 1408, the ambitious and promising King of Naples, Ladislao I, conquers Rome and pushes as far as Umbria. The following year, he sells his dynastic rights over Dalmatia to the Republic of Venice, which thereby regains its holdings. The young king is leading a project of unification. He seeks to unite all of Italy under his crown, and it seems he may be capable of doing so. At the head of his army is the condottiero Angelo Tartaglia. Already by the 14th century, amidst the turmoil of the time, the first Compagnie di Ventura are formed. Organized forces and actual military academies that contribute significantly to the development of the artist strategy. We have now fully entered the era of the Capitani di Ventura and mercenary warfare, which will characterize the Italian style of war throughout this period. A warfare of cunning and maneuver, avoiding unnecessary death and decisive battles in order to prolong contracts. This way of war will later be pushed to its limits during the High Renaissance. The Compagnia di Ventura fight not for patriotism or loyalty, but for the highest bidder, ultimately weakening Italy's ability to react to foreign powers during the Italian wars. The project of Ladislao il Magnanimo would never be completed. In 1414, he dies, consumed by the consequences of his own dissolute habits. Just as he was preparing to march north, he falls ill, likely of syphilis, and on the 6th of August, passes away prematurely and without heirs. His conquests become undone, and his sister, Giovanna II, inherits the kingdom. She will be the true last Angevin monarch of Naples. Aut Caesar, aut nihil was Ladislaus' motto during his campaigns. History, it seems, chose for him nihil. We're still in 1414. Sigismund of Luxembourg, king of the Romans, convenes the Council of Constance to put an end to the Western Schism. The council concludes in 1417. The Pope and anti-popes are deposed or resign, and Pope Martin V is elected, formally ending the schism. 2 years before, however, during the council, the Bohemian reformer Jan Hus is deceitfully condemned and burned at the stake, laying the foundation for the Hussite Wars, a conflict between Bohemians and Germans that will begin in 1419, notable for the innovative and extensive use of early firearms by the Hussite general Jan Žižka. In 1415, the English win the Battle of Agincourt, leading to the Treaty of Troyes recognizing Henry V as heir to the French throne. In 1420, Giovanna II of Naples formally associates King Alfonso V of Aragon with the throne as her heir apparent. After some conflict with René of Anjou, a rival claimant of the throne, the Kingdom of Naples will become an Aragonese possession, uniting with Sicily in 42. A young condottiero takes part in this conflict, San Francesco Sforza, who will soon reappear in our chronology and will even briefly take center stage. That same year marks the full onset of the Florentine artistic renaissance with the construction of Brunelleschi's dome, an engineering marvel and unprecedented technical achievement for the time. Filippo Brunelleschi, after rediscovering linear geometric perspective, designs the world's largest self-supporting dome. Between 23 and 28, Masaccio introduces perspective into his painting, creating three-dimensional scenes and inaugurating Renaissance painting. At the same time, Donatello creates statues inspired by classical antiquity and the natural human form, revolutionizing sculpture. In 1440, he will sculpt the David in bronze, the first freestanding nude statue since antiquity. In 1423, another Visconti War breaks out. The objective is the conquest of Romagna. By 1425, the Venetians join the conflict in an effort to contain the second wave of Milanese expansionism. Filippo Maria Visconti is defeated twice and forced into peace agreements in 26 and 27. In 1429, north of the Alps, Joan of Arc wins her first military victory, lifting the siege of Orléans and securing the cause of the Dauphin of France, Charles VII. 2 years later, she will be condemned to the stake. Among her forces were 200 Piedmontese soldiers. That same year, the Council of Basel is convened. It will later move first to Ferrara and then to Florence. A delegation of 700 Byzantines sent by Emperor John VIII, Palaiologos, arrives with the aim of reconciling the Great Schism, in the hopes of gaining Western support against the advancing Ottomans. The arrival of these delegates in Florence becomes a further catalyst for the Italian Renaissance. Many of them deliver orations on classical philosophy during their stay in the peninsula. Cosimo de' Medici himself, upon hearing the lectures of Platon, becomes convinced of the need to return to the spiritual and political values of ancient Platonic philosophy, and he will later support the foundation of the Florentine Neoplatonic Academy. The council also gives rise, due to tensions between papal and conciliar authority, to the so-called Little Schism, which, however, will last only 10 years. Time has come for us now to introduce ourselves to one of the first true protagonists of the Renaissance, Cosimo de' Medici, born 1389. Son of Giovanni, Cosimo was educated from an early age in Humanist circles, where he learned Latin, Greek, Arabic, as well as commerce and finance, following the Medici tradition. His father had succeeded in becoming the chief financier of the Roman Church, amassing an immense amount of wealth. By 1420, the family had become a principal lender to the newly elected Pope, Martin V. With Giovanni retiring from active business, management of the bank is left in the hands of his sons, Lorenzo and Cosimo. But it was Cosimo, true architect of the bank's fortune, who succeeded in opening branches of the family business in Bruges, Paris, London, and in many other major European cities, building a fortune so vast that he could quietly manipulate the political life of Florence. After the death of his father in 1429, Cosimo manages to form a genuine political party, an alliance of patrician families capable of wresting power in Florence from the hands of the oligarchic Albizzi and Strozzi factions. These families had taken control of the republican institutions following the Ciompi revolt we mentioned earlier. However, the Florentine patriciate, recognizing the danger Cosimo posed, manages to have him imprisoned. Yet Cosimo, skilled strategist even behind bars, manages to rally the population and the other Italian states to prevent his sentence from being carried out. The government, led by Rinaldi degli Albizzi, pressured by the situation, commutes his sentence from life in prison to exile. But the Medici patriarch continues to influence politics even from afar, and just 1 year later, he returns to Florence in triumph, acclaimed by the people who preferred the tolerant Medici to the aristocratic Albizzi. Thus begins the Medici crypto-signoria. Crypto because it was hidden behind republican institutions, but in fact, the Medici ruled with authority not dissimilar to that of the other signori, lords of northern Italy. Cosimo himself would only serve twice as Gonfaloniere di Giustizia, but he will closely oversee every process of the state in a secret that was not completely invisible. It's easy for us to draw a comparison to the Principate of Augustus. Contributing further to the Medici's elevated status is their deliberate promotion of individuals from modest social origins, combined with their patronage of public construction, offering all citizens a visible expression of the positive impact of Medicean prosperity. In foreign policy, Cosimo maintains a traditional alliance with Venice, acting as a counterbalance to the Visconti. Filippo Maria, driven by the ambition of rebuilding his father's vast domain, renews in these years the war against Florence. The city is ultimately saved by the intervention of Francesco Sforza. The encounter and subsequent friendship between Cosimo and Francesco will prove crucial to the political developments in Italy in the years to come. In 1339, Johannes Gutenberg begins contemplating the possibility of a new typographic process that could accelerate and simplify the transmission of knowledge. In the future, he will invent movable type printing, an innovation fundamental to the diffusion of Renaissance ideas. The year after, we come to the decisive clash between the Duchy of Milan and the Florentine-Venetian alliance in the Battle of Anghiari. The Milanese commander Niccolò Piccinino is defeated by the Florentine army, led by Cosimo's cousin, Bernardetto de' Medici. Over the next 7 years, the anti-Visconti League will advance steadily, and Venice will further expand its mainland holdings. In 1444, in the Balkans, The Crusade of Varna ends in disaster, bringing to a close the last significant attempt to contain the Ottomans before the fall of Constantinople. They will now be able to act freely for several decades. Filippo Maria Visconti, suffering from bronchitis since his early years, is now standing at death's door. He left no legitimate heirs, only one natural daughter by his mistress, Bianca Maria Visconti. She had been promised to Francesco Sforza when the man was still in the Duke's service, serving as a useful political pawn. Though legitimized, Bianca had been excluded from the succession line, yet things now were about to change. In 1447, Filippo Maria dies in complete solitude in his castle at Porta Giovia in Milan. The lack of legitimate heirs has led the Milanese to proclaim the restoration of their ancient communal liberties, and the so-called Ambrosian Republic is established, named after the city patron saint. Francesco Sforza is hired by the new rulers of the city to prevent him from seizing it by force. He launches a series of military campaigns against the Serenissima, which was trying to exploit the chaos by conquering Lodi and Piacenza. But when Francesco in 48 crushes the Venetian troops at the Battle of Caravaggio, the Venetian Republic offers him a payment to turn back and conquer Milan instead. The captain had been waiting just for a chance like this. He arrives at the gates of Milan in 49 and lays siege to it for 1 year. The people themselves will open the gates for him and will welcome him in celebration. Thus was born the Sforza dynasty. Meanwhile, the Doge of Venice, Francesco Foscari, begins to rethink the unfolding situation. He realizes the condottiero has grown too powerful. As Sforza lays siege to Milan, Foscari strikes a deal with the Ambrosian Republic. The Venetians demand that the Republic hold on to its remaining territories from the former duchy, and that Sforza accepts the conquests made by the Venetians up to that point, an offer he predictably rejects. War has become unavoidable. Cosimo de' Medici, in the meantime, Machiavellian ante litteram, had long feared that a Venetian victory might further strengthen their military power and thus threaten the delicate balance of power among the Italian states. Cosimo, therefore, provided substantial financial support to Sforza, and thanks to their already established friendship, secured a powerful ally. The Sforza capture of the Duchy of Milan draws the attentions of the rulers of the great European powers. Charles VII of France, who supports the Orleans claim on the duchy, Alfonso of Trastamara, who desires in Genoese possessions to bolster Aragonese commercial power, and of Emperor Frederick III of Habsburg, who refuses to recognize Sforza's legitimacy, as only the emperor holds the right to invest someone of the duchy, making Francesco an usurper in the eyes of imperial law. However, through able political maneuvering on the part of Cosimo, the Medici patriarch manages to bring the French to his side, taking advantage of the fears of Charles on Aragonese expansionism. Two opposing coalitions thus form. On one side, Sforza, the Medici, the Kingdom of France, and René of Anjou, still claiming the crown of Naples, and on the other, Venice, the Kingdom of Naples, and the Holy Roman Empire. The conflict will drag on for several years, but in 1453, the fall of Constantinople to Mehmed II would dramatically shift the priorities of the Italian and European states. With the fall of the last city of the Roman Empire, the Italian states suddenly found themselves on the front line as the next logical target of Ottoman ambitions. On the 9th of April 1454, Venice and Milan officially ratified the Peace of Lodi, setting their mutual border along the Adda River. This agreement leads directly to the creation of the Italic League, an alliance encompassing the entire peninsula, from the Republic of Venice to the Kingdom of Naples, including the Papal States. The member states commit to defending one another should the integrity of any of them be threatened. The Peace of Lodi ushers in 4 decades of relative stability, creating the conditions for the Renaissance to reach its full potential. Yet, this peace also guarantees a frozen balance of power, rooted in the regional states' inability to assert dominance and in the fear of foreign, particularly French, intervention. This policy of equilibrium indeed will foster economic and cultural growth, but it will also prevent the formation of a modern national state, as is occurring in other parts of Europe at the same time, and will allow Italy to become an easy prey when it will attract continental interests impossible to resist. The very balance that will allow Italy to prosper will become the very cause of its downfall. The same year as Constantinople is falling, the 100 Years' War comes to an end in France with the Battle of Castillon. England has been defeated and is forced to relinquish all its continental territories except for the small enclave of Calais. The interminable war had the effect of accelerating the transformation of France from a feudal monarchy into a centralized modern state. The disastrous aftermath of the conflict will furthermore become one of the main causes behind the beginning of a War of the Roses in England, ultimately bringing the Tudor dynasty to power. In 1456, with the victorious defense of Belgrade led by John Hunyadi, the Ottoman advance in the Balkans is halted for another 70 years. With John's victory, we also assist to the rise to power of the famous Vlad Dracula III of Wallachia, the Impaler, Dracula. In 1461, Ahmed II conquers the Empire of Trebizond, the last successor state of the Eastern Empire. This conquest marks the beginning of a war between Venice and the Ottomans, which will end in 79 with the loss for the Stato da Mar of many of its Aegean possessions. Let us now return to Cosimo de' Medici. At the time of the Peace of Lodi, Cosimo was 64 years of age. Afflicted with gout and advanced in age, Cosimo the Elder thus gradually begins withdrawing from politics and from the management of the family bank. It's 1463 and his beloved son, Giovanni, is now dead. Deeply affected by his loss, Cosimo falls in a profound depressive state. His eldest son, Piero, known as Il Gottoso, the gouty and now heir apparent, has been ill his entire life, and in his father's eyes does not seem a worthy successor to what had by then become an empire. Cosimo's only joy in his final years is the presence of his young grandson, Lorenzo, son of Piero, who shares his intellect and spirit. The elderly Cosimo places his final hopes in him, and on the 1st of August, 1464, one of the fathers of the Italian Renaissance passes away. But his legacy is in good hands. It was not a mistake to place his hope in young Lorenzo. Educated by the finest tutors available, Lorenzo displayed charisma and intellect from an early age. During the rule of his father Piero, he sent in various diplomatic missions to both gain experience and personally meet the other rulers of Italy. These journeys proved extremely fruitful for both the young man and his family's bank. Still, upon his return to Florence in 1466, the political situation had grown unstable. Francesco Sforza had died of illness, and his heir, Galeazzo Maria, is in France supporting the king against Charles the Bald, Duke of Burgundy, during the revolt of the public good. Medicean power relied on the alliance with the Sforzas to ensure his existence, and the enemy of the Medici, grown in number after several missteps in Piero's government, seek to exploit the power vacuum in Milan to organize a plot aimed at assassinating the head of the family. Yet Piero had become aware of the conspirators' plans, who intended to murder him upon his return home. It is none other than 16-year-old Lorenzo to foil the conspiracy by following his father's strategy. Through deception He buys enough time for Piero to return to Florence and be reinforced by 2,000 Milanese men-at-arms sent by Galeazzo. Several of the plotters, though swiftly exiled, managed to provoke Venice into launching a brief war against Florence. The Serenissima dispatches an army under a condottiero flying a curious banner. But despite the heavy use of artillery, the campaign yields inconclusive results, allowing Pope Paul II to impose peace between the sides. The young Lorenzo, in 69, marries Clarice Orsini, a member of one of the most prominent Roman noble families, concluding a broader Medici effort to insert themselves into the social orbit of a papal patrician class. On the 2nd of December of that same year, his father Piero, worn down by his long illness, passes away. Barely 20 years old, Lorenzo becomes a de facto ruler of the Florentine Republic. Alongside his brother Giuliano, in his early years of governance, already succeeds in centralizing power even further within a republic. Until his death, he will serve as the balancing force holding the Italic League together. Concurrently, still in 69, the marriage between Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon is celebrated, unifying in the hands of their future heir the whole of Spain and permanently altering the balance of power in the Mediterranean. In 1477, Charles the Bold dies in battle. The army of René of Lorraine, paid by Louis XI, defeats the Duke of Burgundy, and the Swiss establish their reputation as a formidable force. The Burgundian territories are passed down to his only daughter, Mary, who will marry Maximilian of Habsburg and become the grandmother of the future Emperor Charles V. That same year, the highly nepotistic Humanist Pope, Sixtus IV, begins restoration work on the then Great Chapel, now known as the Sistine. Some of the greatest artists of the time will contribute to its construction, leading to some of the most famous frescoes of Renaissance Italy. In 1478, Lorenzo faces his most severe setback. After years of centralization and subversion of republican institutions to the detriment of other families, Il Magnifico has drawn the ire of numerous political forces, both inside and outside Florence. In these years, Sixtus IV enters into conflict with the Medici, and the plan for the Pazzi conspiracy is set in motion. In addition to the Pope, King Ferrante of Naples and the Republic of Siena also become embroiled in the plan. The plot is enabled by the death a few years earlier of the sadistic and cruel Galeazzo Maria Sforza, protector with his military of the Medici regime. He routinely committed the worst abuses and acts of violence against both friends and foes, leading a group of nobles to conspire and ultimately execute his murder. The transfer of power to his young heir, Gian Galeazzo, only 7 years old at the time, triggered a conflict over the regency of the duchy, allowing the conspirators to act without fear of Milanese intervention. To emerge victorious in the conflict will be Ludovico Maria Sforza, known as El Moro, the Moor, who will be able to get to know better further down the line. His rule will play a pivotal role in the eventual collapse of Italian independence. The anti-Medici coalition, emboldened by these developments, moves to assassinate Lorenzo and Giuliano. Two killers attack the brothers during Mass at Santa Maria del Fiore in Firenze. Giuliano is killed, but Lorenzo is saved by his friend Francesco Nori, who threw himself between the blade and Lorenzo's body, sacrificing his life for his friend. It was ultimately the people's devotion for Lorenzo to determine his fate. Once aware of the unfolding events, they hurled themselves at the attackers. One of them, Bernardo Baroncelli, will be unknowingly immortalized by a young Leonardo da Vinci in a sketch of his execution. Lorenzo's revenge will be swift and severe, but the conspiracy will not end here. It has now escalated into the Pazzi War. The Pope has declared war on Florence with the support of Napoli, Siena, Lucca and Urbino. The Republic finds itself in a precarious position. Its allies are preoccupied with other concerns. Venice is still engaged against the Ottomans and their incursions into Friuli, and the Milanese are distracted by a Neapolitan-sparked rebellion in Genoa, at the moment under their control. The war is drawing to a close, to the detriment of Florence. But two extraordinary events bring about its end. The first is a daring diplomatic maneuver by Lorenzo himself, who, at the risk of his own life, personally travels to Ferrante's court in an attempt to negotiate peace. The second, and even more decisive event, is the conquest of Otranto in 1480 by the hands of an Ottoman force, reportedly facilitated by a Venetian safe conduct. On July 28th, 60,000 Turks land at Otranto, and after an heroic resistance, the city is massacred. All males over the age of 15 are executed, while women and children are violated and enslaved. In the end, only 800 men survive the massacre, but even then were ultimately executed by General Ahmed Pasha. Italy, and indeed all of Europe, are traumatized by the event. The myth of Turkish invincibility had already been long widespread in the continent. The Pope, fearing for his life, offers peace and lifts Lorenzo's excommunication, which he had issued at the beginning of the conflict. A Christian army is assembled. A crusade is called. At its head is Duke Alfonso of Calabria, son and heir to King Ferrante. In addition to soldiers from all over Italy, the army includes Hungarian militiamen and Portuguese galleys. Thus begins the siege to retake the city. It will run on until the 10th of September 1481, when the Ottomans are forced to surrender, also due to the power vacuum created by the death of Mehmed II a few months earlier. In the end, when the city was handed back, just 300 survivors were left. To gain the most from these tragic events was Lorenzo De Medici. With the threat of his republic's collapse averted, he is quick to commemorate the Ottoman assault with the commission of a medal. In time, however, he too lends his support to the Christian army's campaign retaking the city. In these years, following the foiled conspiracy, Lorenzo emerges more powerful than ever. He further consolidates Medici power, and the Florentine Republic even manages to slowly expand its borders with the conquest of Sarzana and Pietrasanta. In 1482, Medici faces yet another conflict with the Salt Wars. Venice, taking advantage of an internal turmoil in the Duchy of Milan, known as the War of the Reds, seeks to expand on the mainland and seize the salt mines of Comacchio from Ferrara. The conflict gradually expands to involve all the main forces in the peninsula. It is yet another symptom, like other conflicts we have seen together, of a growing unstable and conflictual climate that was slowly spreading throughout the peninsula. With the papacy that during all of these conflicts acted solely to expand the power and territories of the Della Rovere family, to which Pope Sixtus IV belongs. The war ends in favor of the Venetians, despite a change of alliances made by the Papal States during the course of the conflict. Shortly afterwards, Lorenzo is finally freed once and forever from the interference of Sixtus. His successor, Pope Innocent VIII, will see the friendship between Florence, Naples and the Papal States as the most necessary bulwark against foreign ambitions on Italian soil. Taking advantage of his new alignment, the Medici Patriarch manages to have his son Giovanni, future Pope Leo X, appointed cardinal. Around the same time, one of the most celebrated masterpieces of the Renaissance is completed, The Birth of Venus by Sandro Botticelli. Returning to Lorenzo, the final years of rule of the Magnifico are marked by the presence in Florence of a striking figure, Dominican friar Girolamo Savonarola. He had been invited to the city in 1482 by Lorenzo himself due to his reputation as a preacher. The man begins preaching with growing fervor against moral corruption and worldly luxury. Savonarola thunders against the degeneration of the church and of Florentine customs, prophesying divine punishments and a coming reckoning. In just a few years, he will gather a vast popular following. In 91, he will become prior of the convent of San Marco, and when Charles VIII, King of France, will soon descend into Italy and the Medici government will fall, it will be him leading the Florentine Republic and establishing a theocratic regime that will, however, prove short-lived. Between the years 88 and 90, Leonardo da Vinci, painter, sculptor, scientist, quintessential Renaissance man, considered one of the greatest geniuses of human history and a figure that needs no further introductions, paints the Lady with an ermine, one of his most renowned works. The other artwork shown on screen is Madonna and Child by Andrea Orcagna, created around 1355, and it is exceedingly clear here the remarkable advancements that the Renaissance allowed the visual arts to achieve in just over a century. It's now 1492. Lorenzo, who for decades had steered Italian politics, maintaining it in a precarious balance, is nearing the end of his life. The man who has accompanied us through most of our journey is now 42 years of age, but gout, the hereditary curse of the Medici, is about to take him as well. This year is marked by two other monumental events. First, the completion of the Reconquista with the fall of the last Muslim stronghold in the Iberian Peninsula to Christian forces, and second, the discovery of the Americas as the Genoese explorer Cristoforo Colombo lands on the shores of a new world, unaware of the discovery he made. This year functions as a historiographical watershed between the Middle Ages and the beginning of a modern era. Of course, little changed from one day to the next, and the Renaissance did not begin, nor did it end, here. With the three Medici governments we have examined, Florence has emerged profoundly transformed. A vast number of artistic and urban projects have been financed by the family, and the city's prestige has grown immensely. Lorenzo has sponsored the greatest artists of his time, using them not only as creators of beauty for the Florentine people, but as instruments of cultural hegemony abroad, a form of soft power employed by the Republic. Leonardo himself, once part of Lorenzo's circle, has been sent to Milan in 82 precisely as part of this broader cultural expansion strategy. The legacy of Lorenzo De Medici, il Magnifico, is manifold and enduring. It lives on today in the beauty of Florence and in the poetry himself composed. Yet today there is a tendency to exaggerate his influence on the era, while often overlooking that of his grandfather Cosimo, who in many respects could be argued to have been the greater man. While the elder Medici successfully took control over the Republic and managed to turn the Medici Bank into the foremost financial institution in the world, Lorenzo, by contrast, has led it towards bankruptcy. He never showed the same care in economic matters as his grandfather, devoting himself instead entirely to political and diplomatic affairs. Whatever judgment posterity may render, on the night of the 8th of April, 1492, Lorenzo draws his last breath, and Italy has lost one of its most skilled men, 2 years before the beginning of the ruin of Italy. Intesasi in Firenze la morte di Lorenzo, perché morì a Careggi al luogo suo, vi concorse subito moltissimi cittadini a visitare Piero, suo figliuolo, al quale, per essere il maggiore, si apparteneva per successione allo Stato. E di poi si fecero in Firenze le esequie senza pompa e sontuosità, ma con concorso di tutti i cittadini della città, tutti con qualche segno di Bruno, e con dimostrazione di essere morto uno pubblico padre e padrone della città, la quale, sì come in vita sua, raccolto insieme ogni cosa, era stata felice, Così dopo la morte sua cadde in tante calamità ed infortuni che moltiplicorono infinitamente il desiderio di lui e la reputazione sua. Francesco Guicciardini, Storie Fiorentine, 9th chapter. As we bid farewell to Lorenzo, it's time to turn our gaze to another key figure of the age, a story essential to understanding the chain of events that will in just a few years ignite the Italian wars. Let us briefly return to the beginning of the century. In August 1420, Queen Giovanna II of Anjou names Alfonso V of Aragon as her heir, in exchange for his support against a rival claimant, Louis III of Anjou. Giovanna will later rescind her promise, but Alfonso will continue to push for his claim on the throne. In 1443, Alfonso concludes his conquest of the Kingdom of Naples at the expense of René, brother of Louis. During these years, the Crown of Aragon had effectively become the political embodiment of the Mediterranean trade network established by the Catalan merchant class in the late Middle Ages, and the Kingdom of Naples was added to this as the most precious jewel in the diadem. The kingdom, in fact, seemed far too important to be reduced to a mere province of the Mediterranean Empire of Aragon, and was treated with special regard. Alfonso, after his conquest, decides to reside permanently in Naples and will never return to Zaragoza, leaving behind his wife, with whom he will never produce legitimate heirs. His only son is the illegitimate Ferdinando, known as Ferrante. The father, intending to secure a future for his son, has him summoned from Barcelona to Naples and had begun preparing him for succession even before completing his conquest. In 1440, he has formally legitimized him by his own authority, and as part of a plan to emancipate Naples from the rest of the Aragonese dominions, he declared him heir to the Neapolitan throne. The crown of Barcelona, on the other hand, was to pass to Alfonso's younger brother, John. Upon Alfonso's death in 1458, and despite papal recognition granted in 1443 and reaffirmed several times, John of Anjou, son of René, takes advantage in 1460 of a discontent among the pro-Angevin Neapolitan barons, who had long held considerable power in the kingdom, to launch an attempt to reclaim the throne lost by his father. With the nobility in open revolt and a maritime expedition led by Jean himself, the first stage of the conflict appears to favor an Angevin restoration. But Ferrante succeeds in defeating and repelling his rival, thanks in no small part to the support of the other Italian states, and especially the papacy. The end of this first baronial rebellion is followed by 20 years of internal peace, allowing the fully Italianized King Ferrante to pursue a project of stabilization for his kingdom through an approach rooted in local identity and increasingly detached from his cousins in Barcelona. Ferrante, during this time, seeks to undermine the power of the barons, showing himself generous towards those loyal to his cause, yet harsh and ruthless towards his enemies, resorting even to deception and broken promises to neutralize them. In 78, he takes part in the Pazzi conspiracy and the ensuing war against Florence. He receives in 79 Lorenzo the Magnificent and offers him an illusory peace, only to be forced into redirecting his army when the Ottomans soon thereafter capture Otranto. It goes to his son and heir, Alfonso, the duty to retake the city, an endeavor in which, as we have seen, he succeeded, adding to an already well-earned reputation as a man of war. Alfonso's attempt to modernize his kingdom by breaking down entrenched feudal particularism meets fierce resistance in the form of a barons' conspiracy. At the time, only an estimated 7% of the inhabited centers in the Kingdom of Naples belonged to the royal domains, a legacy of the Norman Swabian feudal and fiscal system which had never been fully reformed. The rest of the territory remained in the hands of the baronial aristocracy, meaning that the complex of the kingdom's finances and resources were effectively under baronial control, rendering the monarch subordinate to this power structure. Added to this was the backing of the Papal States, which had long viewed the Kingdom of Naples as a feudal possession under its authority. The conspiracy that emerged thus posed a genuine threat to the reign of Ferrante. The rift between the Aragonese crown and the major feudal houses finally explodes in 1485 with a great conspiracy of the barons, led by Antonello Sanseverino, Prince of Salerno. Around him rally some of the most powerful families of the kingdom, a continentally minded aristocracy accustomed to ruling autonomously and managing their lands as kingdoms within the kingdom. The conspiracy, driven by hostility towards the centralizing reforms of Ferrante and Alfonso, aims to isolate Naples by inviting the Pope and the Angevin pretenders to enter the kingdom from the north. But the plan fails before it could really begin. John of Lorraine never arrives, and Ferrante swiftly crashes the defenses in Abruzzo, sending Alfonso to suppress the rebels, a mission the now 37-year-old heir carries out with great brutality and ruthlessness. The king then stages a false reconciliation. He summons the leaders of the conspiracy, promising pardon and clemency. In Miglionico, in September 1485, Ferrante welcomes the barons with great honors, grants all their requests, and in return obtains their pledge of peace. But the following year, in the hall of the barons at Castelnuovo, during a staged wedding celebration held for the occasion, he has all the main conspirators arrested. They will all be sentenced to death. Thus Ferrante steals his authority over the kingdom in blood, though by then little time remained for him to reign. We are now in 1493, and the end is nigh. Ludovico Sforza il Moro, regent of the Duchy of Milan, in the name of his nephew Gian Galeazzo, is a capable and intelligent man, but endlessly ambitious, even to his own detriment. His plan to take full control of the duchy by sidelining his nephew is by now fully formed. But when the young Isabella of Aragon, granddaughter of Ferrante, becomes the wife of Gian Galeazzo, his intentions grow clear even to the rulers of the other Italian states. Ludovico stands at the head of the second wealthiest state on the peninsula, and that alone is enough to turn the friendship between the Aragonese and the Sforza into a budding rivalry. All the man awaits is the birth of a male heir. Legitimate succession is the one thing Il Moro still lacks to lay claim to the ducal title. Sensing the threat, Isabella quickly appeals to her father Alfonso, the fiery and vengeful heir to the throne of Naples. War is narrowly avoided thanks to the intervention of Ferrante himself, who manages to calm tensions, moved also by the affection he bears for his older granddaughter, Beatrice, Ludovico's wife. With the death a year earlier of Pope Innocent VIII, Ludovico succeeds in securing the election of the corrupt and dissolute Rodrigo Borgia as Pope Alexander VI. In April, Ludovico forges an alliance with the new pontiff, soon joined by Ferrara and Mantova. Despite Alfonso's thirst for war, Ferrante opens negotiations with the Pope, hoping to avoid dangerous developments on the peninsula. But an heir is born. And so it has come that Ludovico Sforza calls Charles VIII of France into Italy. The French king, who claims dynastic rights to the Kingdom of Naples through his Angevin Valois lineage, heir to the claim once put forth by his great-uncle, René of Anjou. Ludovico's plan is to exploit the French threat, a sword of Damocles held over Italy, to block any moves that might threaten him. But Charles refuses to be anyone's pawn. After years of hesitation, in 1494, the French king announces not only his intentions to descend into Italy, but to lead the campaign himself at the head of a Transalpine army. Ludovico had believed that he would lead a mercenary army on behalf of the French king. Ludovico had believed that the Kingdom of Naples would not fall into French hands. It is 1494. Leonardo da Vinci begins painting a Last Supper. It is 1494. In January, King Ferdinando I of Naples is dead, and in September the King of France, descends into Italy at the head of an army of 30,000 men and 40 artillery pieces. Thus begin the Italian Wars. With the start of the Italian Wars, or as Machiavelli calls them, the Ruina d'Italia, a new chapter opens. For over 50 years, foreign armies will battle for European dominance on Italian soil, and no one will pay the price more than Italy itself. This marks the beginning of foreign domination, which will keep the peninsula under subjugation until the 19th century with the Wars of Independence and finally unification. And so, for now, our journey through the Italian Renaissance comes to an end. The Renaissance itself is not over. It will endure, remarkably, through decades of war, lasting at least into the second half of the 16th century. But the events and the key figures of that next phase, those we will discuss together in the next video, which will focus on the Italian wars themselves, on their broader causes, on why the Italian states failed in their resistance, and on the consequences these wars had for both Italy and Europe. Until then, I thank you for joining me on this long journey. I hope it was useful, or at the very least, that it kept you entertained. I'll see you next time. Alla prossima.